Welcome, dear friends, to a quiet corner of the forest where mice, hedgehogs, and squirrels share gentle days and little adventures. Pour yourself a warm cup of tea, settle in, and let's wander together into the cozy world of woodland tales. The Whispering Hollow. Morning drifted lazily through the hollow, sunlight sifting in pale ribbons between oak branches still heavy with midsummer green. Dew clung to spider webs, and the moss on the ground shone as though polished overnight. Tobias, the brown field mouse, was sweeping the worn flagstones at his cottage door when he paused. There was again a low, hollow sort of hum, soft as a bee but steady, coming from somewhere deep in the earth beneath the roots of the old willow at the brook's bend. Tobias leaned on his broom, ears perked. The sound came and went, a faint vibration underpaw. It was strange, but not menacing. If anything, it almost seemed as though the hollow itself was sighing in its sleep. By midday, he had half a dozen visitors asking if he had heard it too. Clover the squirrel claimed it shook the teacups on her shelf. Bramble the hedgehog muttered that it had rattled loose 3 thistles outside his den. And Tilly, ever excitable, swore it was a mystical tune played by the earth. "We should investigate," she declared, bouncing on her paws. Grady the stoat groaned. "Investigate? It's probably just water bubbling under a root. Hardly worth poking about." But Clover was already gathering a lantern, and Tilly tied a ribbon in her fur for luck. Tobias, half amused and half intrigued, fetched a spade and a small basket for supplies. The little company made their way to the willow's bend. The brook gurgled innocently, cattails nodding in the mild breeze, dragonflies skimming its surface. Yet the sound was clearer here, a faint, resonant thrumming, like the echo of faraway drums. They pressed their paws to the ground, each feeling the vibration. Clover's eyes grew wide. "It's hollow beneath. Do you think?" "Only one way to find out," Tobias said gently, though his heart pattered with the same curiosity. They dug carefully at the base of the willow, moving earth and pebbles aside until Tobias's spade struck air. A small opening appeared, leading into darkness beneath the roots. Cool air wafted out, carrying that strange, steady hum. "Well then," Bramble grunted, peering in. A hollow indeed. Clover's tail twitched. What if it's a hidden chamber? An old burrow? A secret room? Tilly's whiskers quivered. Or treasure? Grady, though skeptical, leaned closer despite himself. Or trouble? The friends exchanged looks, hearts racing with the peculiar excitement of discovery. Tobias struck a match and lit Clover's lantern. The glow spilled into the opening, showing only smooth, damp earth descending into shadow. "We'll explore tomorrow," he decided, "in daylight and with proper rope." As they made their way homeward, the hum followed them faintly, as if the hollow beneath the willow were waiting patiently, whispering to itself. That night, Tobias lay awake listening to the sound threading through the roots. It was not loud, nor urgent, but it stirred something deep within him. An old, quiet wonder that the world, even in their peaceful hollow, still held mysteries beneath its surface. The following morning dawned cool and pale, with a ribbon of mist still coiled across the meadow. Tobias said about packing their supplies: coils of twine for safety, a sturdy lantern with a fresh wick, a pouch of oatcakes, and, at Clover's insistence, a small notebook to record any marvelous discoveries. By the time Clover, Tilly, Bramwell, and a reluctant Grady arrived, Tobias had everything in a neat basket. "We'll go slowly," he said, his voice calm but steady. "It's likely just an old burrow. Still, best to be careful." Grady muttered something about chasing shadows, but even he couldn't hide his curiosity. The group padded down to the willow's bend, where the brook whispered against its reeds and dragonflies flitted like living sparks. The opening they had dug the day before yawned darkly beneath the great roots. The low hum continued, faint but steady, pulsing like the heartbeat of the earth. Clover's tail fluffed with anticipation. It's waiting for us. Bramwell cleared his throat. Or it's a draft rattling through a hollow log. Don't get carried away. Tilly clasped her paws. Oh, but isn't it exciting? Tobias tied the twine about his waist and handed the other end to Bramwell. Hold steady. I'll go first. Lantern in paw, he crouched and wriggled into the opening. The cool air smelled of damp moss and roots, earthy and old. The tunnel sloped gently downward, wide enough for a small mouse, but tight for larger creatures. Tobias's whiskers brushed against roots that dangled like strands of hair. The hum grew louder as he descended, echoing faintly through the soil. He paused now and then, calling back to the others, who crouched at the entrance, their voices muffled but reassuring. After a short crawl, the tunnel widened suddenly into a hollow chamber. Tobias held the lantern high, its glow spilling across curved earthen walls. The space was larger than he'd expected, enough for all of them to fit comfortably. The ground was packed smooth, as though paws or claws had once shaped it. And there, right in the center, lay a pool of water no wider than a dinner plate, perfectly still. The hum rose from it, steady as breath. Tobias blinked in surprise. A pool underground, beneath a willow's roots. He leaned closer, holding the lantern to the water's edge. The surface reflected his face faintly, though the image shimmered oddly, as though the pool were deeper than it seemed. Anything, Bramwell called from above. Tobias's voice echoed strangely in the chamber. Come down carefully. There's something here you must see. One by one, they wriggled through the tunnel and dropped into the hollow. Clover gasped at once. A hidden spring. Tilly leaned over the pool with wide eyes. It's glowing. And indeed, faint threads of light wove beneath the water, like moonlight caught in its depths. The hum seemed to rise and fall with the glow, as though the pool itself were breathing. Grady crouched, whiskers twitching. Odd, I'll admit, but not treasure. Just wet. Still, even he lingered, staring at the shimmering depths. They sat for a long while listening to the hum and watching the faint glow shift. Clover made notes in her little book, sketching the pool with quick strokes. Tilly whispered that perhaps it was a magical spring, a hidden secret of the brook. Tobias, though not one to leap to fancies, couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something very old and very patient, waiting beneath the willow all along. When at last they climbed out, brushing soil from their fur and blinking in the sunlight, the brook seemed to whisper more sweetly than ever, as though sharing in their secret. For days afterward, Tobias found himself thinking about the hidden chamber. The hum drifted into his dreams, a steady thrum like a lullaby. Clover filled her notebook with sketches and theories, while Tilly told anyone who would listen that they had found a breathing pool of light. Bramwell grumbled about dirt in his quills, but Tobias noticed he still wandered near the willow more often than before. It was Grady who first noticed something peculiar. He came stomping into Tobias's workshop one afternoon, clutching his shiniest pebble from the brook. Look at this, he demanded. At first Tobias saw nothing unusual, but when Grady tilted the pebble just so, Tobias caught it. The faintest glow, the same pale shimmer as in the underground pool. Where did you find this one? Tobias asked quietly. Beside the willow. Same day we dug, Grady muttered. Didn't think much of it until last night. Left it by the window, and the thing gleamed like a candle. Word spread quickly. Clover insisted it meant the brook and the pool were connected, part of some greater wonder. Tilly squeaked that they must return at once to listen properly this time. Even Bramwell conceded, gruffly, that there was more to it than mere water. So they returned to the chamber, lanterns lit. The pool shimmered faintly, as before, but this time when Tobias leaned close, he started. His reflection wavered in the water, but behind his face glowed faint outlines of roots, stones, and something else. A shape indistinct like a shadow just out of reach. Clover gasped. "Did you see? Something's there." Tilly leaned in too far, nearly toppling in, and had to be steadied by Bramwell's paw. "It's trying to show us something," she breathed. Tobias frowned, though his whiskers twitched with unease. Or perhaps it only plays tricks with light. But he could not deny the strange pull of the pool, the sense that it was more than mere water. They left in thoughtful silence, each carrying the hum with them like a secret tune. That night, Tobias dreamed again of the brook. Only this time, when he looked into its surface, he saw fireflies circling in spirals, guiding him deeper, always deeper toward the roots. The mystery drew them back again and again. Sometimes they sat in the chamber for hours, simply listening to the hum, which seemed to change ever so slightly with the weather. Deeper after rain, higher when the wind rushed through the meadow. Clover insisted on mapping the sound, marking notes in her book as though it were music. Tilly tried humming along, giggling when the pool seemed to ripple in answer. Even Bramwell admitted, after a long silence, that it made his quills tingle pleasantly. One afternoon, as a summer storm passed overhead, the hum rose sharply, filling the chamber until their very paws vibrated. Tobias held the lantern high, and they all gasped. The pool's glow had brightened, casting ripples of light across the earthen walls. And in that glow, faint etchings became visible, lines carved into the soil itself, like old markings or runes. Clover traced them with trembling paws. Someone was here before us. The markings curved in patterns that almost resembled roots and waves, spirals joining one to the next. Tobias felt a thrill deep in his chest. Whoever had made them was long gone, but their marks remained, hidden until the pool chose to reveal them. Grady swallowed hard, his usual bravado softened. So, not just wet after all. When they finally emerged, the storm had cleared, leaving the world washed and shining. The willow stood tall above them, its branches dripping with rain, and the brook ran swift and clear. The friends looked at one another, knowing they now shared a secret deeper than any they'd ever kept. The hollow beneath the willow was no mere chamber. It was part of the forest's own memory, humming with stories older than their cottages, older than their lives. And they had only just begun to listen. Late summer settled over the hollow, the air warm but edged with that first subtle crispness that whispered of autumn. The meadow's grasses were tall and heavy-headed, bending beneath the hum of bees, and the blackberries along the hedges grew fat and purple, tempting every passerby. One such afternoon, Tobias sat outside his workshop mending a wicker chair when Clover hurried up, clutching something in her paws. "Look what I found," she cried breathlessly. She opened her paws to reveal a smooth pebble, pale gray and faintly glimmering. At first it looked like any other brook stone, but when she set it on Tobias's workbench, a faint vibration thrummed through the wood. Tobias leaned closer, whiskers twitching. "It hums," he murmured. "Not just hums, listen." Clover pressed her ear to the stone, and her eyes widened. "It sings." Indeed, when Tobias bent down, he caught the faintest suggestion of notes, high and sweet, like distant chimes on the breeze. It was not loud, only enough to prickle the fur along his neck. Within the hour, Tilly, Bramwell, and even Grady had gathered to examine the stone. Tilly clapped her paws in delight, declaring it a gift from the pool. Bramwell frowned, muttering that stones didn't sing, though his quills rattled nervously as he listened. Grady, of course, tried to bite it, earning a chorus of scolding. "Where did you find it?" Tobias asked. Clover pointed toward the brook, just downstream from the willow. It was half buried in the mud, At first I thought it was nothing special, but then it hummed in my paws. That evening, they carried the stone back to the willow's chamber. As soon as they lowered it beside the glowing pool, the hum of the stone joined with the thrum of the water. The two sounds twined together, weaving into a soft harmony that filled the chamber like a lullaby. For a long while, no one spoke. The hollow seemed alive with music, gentle and wordless, vibrating through their paws, their whiskers, their hearts. Even Grady, usually the first to scoff, sat still, ears lowered, eyes closed as if caught in a dream. When at last the hum faded into its usual steady pulse, Tobias cleared his throat. It seems the brook, and whatever lies beneath it, has many voices. Tilly whispered, maybe it's trying to talk to us. And though Tobias gave no answer, he carried the thought with him long after they left the chamber, the stone's faint song lingering in his memory like a secret melody. The days grew shorter, the sun sinking earlier behind the meadow's rim, painting the sky with long streaks of amber and violet. With each visit to the willow's chamber, more of the strange markings along the earthen walls became visible, especially when a lantern light caught the faint glimmer in the damp soil. One afternoon, Clover insisted they bring paper and charcoal to trace the markings. She knelt patiently, pressing the charcoal against the paper until the spiral shapes appeared in dark relief. Look, she said, holding up a sheet. These aren't random. They're patterns. Tobias studied them thoughtfully. The lines curled like water ripples, then looped back into shapes that looked remarkably like leaves, roots, or waves. Some even resembled stars. Bramwell grumbled, might be just doodles from whoever dug this place. But Tobias wasn't so sure. The pool reveals them only when it shines. Perhaps they were meant to be hidden until the right moment. Tilly, perched nearby, suddenly gasped. That one looks like the lantern we found in the brook. She pointed to a carving shaped like a circle with rays spilling outward. Clover's eyes sparkled. You're right. Maybe the pool showed us that lantern on purpose. Grady snorted but tapped his claw against another spiral. And this one looks like a snail if you ask me. Still, as they compared markings with memories, a strange sense of connection grew between them. It was as if the hollow itself was weaving their days into its long story, root by root, ripple by ripple. That night, Tobias stayed awake long after the others had gone home, sketching the markings by lamplight in his own notebook. He wasn't given to fancies, but the spirals reminded him of the way seasons turned, one into the next, repeating yet always new. Perhaps, he thought, the hollow wasn't speaking of treasure at all, but of time, how it flows, how it holds stories long after the tellers are gone. Not long after, Clover proposed a daring idea. We should visit at night. The suggestion drew gasps and protests. Bramwell declared it folly, Grady grumbled about damp paws, and even Tobias hesitated. But Clover's eyes shone with determination. The pool shines most when it's dark. Maybe the moonlight will reveal more than lanterns ever could. At last, curiosity won. On a night of clear skies and a near full moon, they gathered by the willow. The brook glittered silver, its ripples flashing like 1,000 coins. The willow's branches swayed gently, whispering against one another. They crept down into the hollow, lantern unlit. At first it was pitch dark, the air damp and still. Then, slowly, the pool began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, until its light filled the chamber like a soft lamp. Gasps echoed in the silence. The markings along the walls gleamed faintly, their spirals clearer than ever. But it was the pool itself that captured their breath. Its surface shimmered like a mirror, and in it they saw not their own reflections, but the brook above, silver in the moonlight, fireflies drifting like sparks, branches bending overhead. It was as though the pool opened a window to the world above, showing them their hollow home from another angle, another time. Tilly leaned close, whiskers trembling. It's showing us itself, Clover whispered, or reminding us that everything above and below is one. For a long time, none of them moved. The glow wrapped them in peace, a hush deeper than sleep. Even Grady, who tried to scoff at first, fell silent, paws folded, staring into the glowing mirror as if he, too, understood its gentle lesson. When they finally climbed back in the night, the brook still gleamed in moonlight, but something had changed. The hollow was no longer a secret apart. It felt bound to them, woven into their days, their laughter, their very footsteps. Tobias gazed up at the stars, thoughtful. Whatever the hollow is, he murmured, it wants to be remembered. And they all, in their hearts, silently promised that they would. After the moonlit visit, the friends found themselves speaking less of mysteries and more of chores. It wasn't that the hollow had been forgotten. It lingered like the faint sound of a bell after it's rung. But the rhythms of daily life soon demanded their share of attention. Tobias spent mornings splitting wood for the cooler nights ahead, his axe striking with steady rhythm. Clover busied herself with gathering late summer herbs and checking on her neat rows of carrots, tugging each one with satisfaction. Tilly helped Bramwell mend his garden fence after a wayward windstorm had toppled part of it, while Grady continued his usual routine of pretending to complain about work, all the while sneaking blackberries from anyone who turned their back. One afternoon, Clover arrived at Tobias's workshop with a small bundle. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing the humming stone. "It hasn't made a sound in days," she said. Tobias turned it over in his paws. It was cool and ordinary now, its faint shimmer dulled. "Perhaps it's resting," he suggested. Clover frowned. "Or perhaps it only sings when it needs to." He smiled, admiring her way of seeing the world. "Like us, then." They placed the stone on a shelf in Tobias's workshop, beside jars of nails and a half-carved spoon. There it stayed, quiet as any other pebble, while life in the meadow continued. Yet sometimes, in the late evenings, Tobias thought he heard a faint hum drifting from that shelf, softer than memory, gentle as a lullaby. He never mentioned it. Some secrets, he thought, were best kept in the heart. The first true chill of autumn arrived on a morning thick with fog. The meadow lay hidden beneath a blanket of gray, and droplets of dew clung to every web and blade of grass. Tilly woke early to fetch water from the brook, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. As she bent with her pail, she caught sight of Tobias on the opposite bank, stacking wood by his door. He waved, and she waved back, both smiling despite the mist. That afternoon, Clover called her friends together with a cheerful announcement. "It's time to store supplies for winter." Grady groaned loudly. Work, work, always work. But when he noticed Clover's basket full of hazelnuts, his tune changed quickly. "Though, I suppose someone has to test them for freshness." Bramwell rolled his eyes, but together they set about the seasonal tasks. Tobias repaired leaky roofs with bundles of reeds. Tilly dried apples in neat rows. Clover pickled beetroot in earthen jars. Bramwell gathered mushrooms from his favorite shady spots, carefully avoiding the suspicious ones. Grady, to everyone's surprise, actually lent a paw in building a new wood pile. "Can't have the rest of you freezing," he muttered, though he ruined the effect by immediately stealing one of Clover's nutcakes when she wasn't looking. The work filled their days with the comfortable clatter of chores, the scrape of shovels, the scent of smoke from first fires, the creak of carts along woodland paths. The hollow remained quiet, a secret resting beneath the willow. They visited less often now, though each time they passed the brook, they glanced toward its roots with a mixture of fondness and curiosity. As the days shortened, Tobias found himself reflecting. Life, he thought, was very much like their hidden chamber, full of patterns one only noticed when the light shifted just so. Perhaps that was all the hollow wished to teach them, to notice, to listen, to carry its hum into the ordinary days. By mid-autumn, The air grew sharp with the scent of ripe fruit. The old orchard beyond the meadow sagged with apples, red, gold, and green, their skins polished by cool breezes. One morning, Tobias suggested, "Why don't we make cider? The press hasn't been used in years." Clover's eyes sparkled. Yes, a proper pressing day. And so the friends set off, baskets in paw, filling them with apples until they were heavy and fragrant. Bramble muttered about sore quills from carrying too many, but he kept picking more all the same. Tilly balanced 3 at once, showing off her nimble paws. Grady, naturally, ate half of his share before it reached the basket. The press itself was an old wooden contraption near the orchard's edge, weathered but sturdy. Tobias oiled the hinges, Bramble tightened the bolts, and soon the apples were tumbling into the hopper. With much heaving and laughing, they cranked the wheel, and golden juice spilled into buckets below. The sweet scent filled the air, mingling with the rustle of fallen leaves. Clover clapped her paws, sticky with juice. "This is perfect," she cried, sipping from a ladle. Tilly wrinkled her nose after her first taste. "Needs more bite. Let ferment a bit." Grady, already gulping from a mug, grinned. "Ferment or not, I'll drink it all." They spent the afternoon singing, laughing, and working until the buckets were full. By the time the sun sank low, they were tired but content, carts laden with jars of cider. As they wheeled their bounty home, Tobias paused to glance at the willow in the distance, its golden leaves drifting down to kiss the brook. For a moment, he thought he heard a faint hum beneath the crunch of leaves and the chatter of his friends. But then Clover called for him to hurry, and he did, smiling as he joined the group. The first snow did not come with a blizzard, nor with thunderous clouds rolling in from the hills. Instead, it drifted down one calm afternoon, light as down feathers shaken from a pillow. Tobias was trimming the last of the hedge around his workshop when the flakes began to fall. At first he thought it was ash from a distant chimney, but when he held out his paw, the cold crystal melted against his fur. He chuckled softly to himself and stepped back to watch. The meadow grew hushed under the white veil, every branch tipped in frost, every footprint filling in almost as soon as it was made. By evening, the world seemed utterly transformed. Clover appeared at Tobias's door, a scarf twice as long as she was wound around her neck. "It's snowing," she exclaimed, though Tobias could hardly have missed it. "We must all go for a walk. You can't let the first snow pass by indoors." Soon the whole company had gathered, Bramble bundled in his patched coat, Grady already grumbling about cold paws, and Tilly twirling in delight as flakes clung to her fur. They tramped through the meadow, leaving a crisscross of tracks, pointing out how every stump and stone wore a white cap. Tilly scooped up handfuls and patted them into lopsided snow creatures, which made Bramble snort. Grady attempted a snowball, but ended up shivering when the half-formed clump broke apart down his tunic. "Serves you right," Clover laughed, handing him a hot chestnut she had tucked in her pocket. They followed the brook, its banks lined in white, until they reached the willow. The snow had softened its sweeping branches, bending them low in heavy arcs. For a while they stood quietly listening. Beneath the hush of snow, the hollow was silent too. Tobias laid a paw against the trunk. The wood felt cool but steady, as though it, too, was settling into winter's long rest. By the time they returned to their burrows, stars glittered sharp in the dark sky, and the snow shone silver in their light. Tobias built up his fire, sat in his armchair, and thought of the tracks they had left behind, already softening under new flakes. Winter deepened quickly. Within a fortnight, the meadow was thick with snow, paths turning into narrow tunnels tramped between drifts. Fires glowed steadily in every hearth, and neighbors grew used to visiting one another with lanterns swinging to light their way. One evening, Clover invited the others to her burrow for roasted nuts and warm cider. Tobias set out after dusk with his lantern, its light flickering on the frosted path. Bramble joined him, humming a tune, and soon they spotted Tilly skipping ahead, her ribbon bouncing against her ear. But when they reached Clover's, there was no light in the window. They knocked, and Clover answered with a sheepish expression. "My lantern went out halfway down the path when I came home," she confessed. "And when I tried to relight it, I dropped the whole thing into the snow. Now the oil's gone." Inside, her burrow was cozy but dim, lit only by the fire. Tilly plopped down with a laugh. "So we'll eat in the dark." Grady arrived last, holding his own lantern aloft smugly. "Unlike the rest of you, I know how to keep a flame steady." He strutted in and set it on the table, whereupon Bramble sneezed, jostled the table, and toppled the lantern onto its side. The flames sputtered dangerously close to Clover's rug before Tobias calmly snatched it upright. "Perhaps," he said with a smile, "we'd best eat by firelight after all." So they did, passing bowls of roasted chestnuts, mugs of steaming cider, and laughing at the gloom whenever someone mistook Bramble's paw for a spoon or tried to sip from an empty cup. By the end of the evening, Clover declared, "Next time, I'll keep 2 lanterns." Grady muttered, "Next time, I'll bring 4. And Tobias, as he walked home beneath the stars, thought that perhaps a little mishap now and then was the best recipe for laughter. One morning after a heavy snowfall, Tilly dashed up to Tobias's workshop, eyes bright. "Come quick, you must see what we've built." Tobias followed her to the meadow, where Clover and Bramble were busily digging a tunnel through the deep snow. The entrance yawned like a cave, and inside the passage twisted left and right in a most elaborate fashion. "It's a shortcut," Clover explained proudly, brushing snow from her fur. "From my burrow to Bramble's." Grady poked his head out from another side, grinning with snow clinging to his whiskers. "Except it doesn't actually reach Bramble's burrow. It just sort of loops back to itself." Indeed, when Tobias tried the tunnel, he found himself circling around, only to emerge at the same spot where he had entered. Tilly giggled. "It's a tunnel to nowhere." But rather than abandon it, the friends spent the afternoon enlarging the passage, adding side chambers, and decorating the walls with pine cones and berries. Soon it became less of a shortcut and more of a meeting hall, complete with a snow bench. They sat inside together, the walls glowing faintly in the light of a lantern Tobias had carefully set in a niche, sipping hot broth Clover had carried in a flask. Snow muffled the outside world, making their laughter sound round and full. As Tobias leaned back against the packed snow, he thought to himself, it might not be practical, but sometimes the silliest projects made the fondest memories. The brook, so lively in summer, had grown slower and stiffer each week. Tobias watched it often from his window, where the water gurgled beneath thin shells of ice that clung to the banks like crystal lace. One morning, after a night so cold the shutters rattled, he found the brook frozen nearly solid. Clover was already at the bank, tapping cautiously with a stick. "Do you think it will hold us?" she asked. Tobias knelt and pressed a paw to the ice. It was smooth and clear, showing stones and weeds locked beneath. "It might, if we're careful." Before he could suggest further caution, Tilly came sliding past on her paws with a triumphant whoop. She spun across the ice, her ribbon fluttering. "It holds! It holds!" she sang. Bramble followed at a slower pace, stepping gingerly, quills bristling at every creak. Grady, meanwhile, charged straight on, arms out like wings, only to sprawl flat a moment later when his paws went out from under him. The others laughed until their sides ached. They spent the morning on the frozen brook, sliding, slipping, and even trying to play a game with pine cones pushed across the ice. Tobias, though not as daring as Tilly, couldn't help smiling as he glided a short distance, wind in his fur. When the sun dipped, they returned to Tobias's workshop to thaw by the fire. Clover rubbed her paws, cheeks glowing. "We must come again tomorrow." Tobias nodded, though he made a mental note to keep a rope handy in case Grady invented another tumble. He had learned that winter fun often came with winter rescues. A heavy snow came the following week, falling so thickly that roofs hunched low and paths vanished overnight. Tobias woke early to the sound of silence, so complete he thought the world had stopped. When he pushed against his door, it wouldn't budge. Snowed in, he muttered, amused. He fetched his small spade and began to dig his way out, sending cascades of white tumbling from the doorway. He wasn't the only one. Across the meadow, Clover's voice echoed faintly. "Help! My door won't open." Bramwell's muffled grumbling joined in, followed by Tilly's peals of laughter. Soon the friends met in the middle of the meadow, each having shoveled a narrow tunnel from their burrows. The snow rose nearly to Tobias's shoulders in the deepest drifts, but the sky was clear and blue above, making their efforts strangely cheerful. Grady arrived last, shaking snow from his ears. "I nearly suffocated," he declared dramatically. "Buried alive in my own bed." "You were probably still asleep," Clover teased. They decided to keep their tunnels connected, carving a twisting passage between homes. By the time they finished, the meadow looked like a network of snowy lanes, complete with arches and alcoves. Lanterns glowed warmly at each doorway, turning the scene into a little underground village. That evening, Tobias sat by his fire, paws sore from shoveling, but heart full. Being snowed in hadn't been trouble at all. It had simply given them reason to build something together. One afternoon, as Tobias sorted nails in his workshop, there came a scratching sound beneath the floor. He paused, ears pricked. The scratching grew louder. Then suddenly, with a puff of earth, a mole's head popped up between two flagstones. "Oh!" the mole exclaimed, blinking at the firelight. "Terribly sorry. Wrong tunnel." Tobias blinked back. "Well, welcome all the same." The mole, who introduced himself as Digby, explained that he had been digging a winter storehouse and had accidentally tunneled into Tobias's workshop. His whiskers twitched with embarrassment. Tobias, amused, invited him to stay for tea. By evening, Clover and Tilly had arrived, curious about the newcomer. Digby proved shy but kind, telling stories of the deep burrows where roots hung like chandeliers and stones gleamed with frost. Grady, of course, tried to convince him to dig a shortcut tunnel directly to his pantry. Digby only chuckled and shook his head. When Digby finally departed, promising to visit again, this time through the door, not the floor, Tobias replaced the flagstone with a smile. The hollow, he thought, was not the only mystery beneath their feet. New friends could appear from anywhere. That night, as snow fell lightly against the shutters, Tobias felt the meadow had grown just a little bigger and a little warmer, too. It began with a faint whistling in the branches and a sky that turned the color of pewter. By late afternoon, the meadow had vanished into swirling white. Tobias bolted his shutters and checked the woodpile twice, his whiskers twitching at the sound of the storm. The snowstorm roared all night, shaking roofs, rattling chimneys, and piling drifts so high that lantern posts nearly disappeared. Tobias sat in his chair, blanket pulled around him, listening to the wind gallop like wild horses across the hollow. He wondered if his friends were safe. By morning, the storm had calmed, leaving a silence so deep it rang in his ears. Tobias dug himself out again, this time finding the meadow nearly unrecognizable. Paths gone, fences buried, the brook hidden under a quilt of white. He set off to check on Clover first, tugging his scarf high. To his relief, her burrow was warm and tidy, though her door was half hidden. "I thought I'd be buried forever," she said with a laugh as Tobias shoveled her steps clear. Together, they visited Bramwell, whose fence had vanished entirely. He snorted at the sight. "Good thing it'll need mending come spring anyway." Tilly was found perched atop a mound of snow, cheerfully declaring it her new palace. Grady had fared less well, complaining of snow that had drifted down his chimney. "My stew froze in the pot," he wailed, though he brightened quickly once Clover offered him a spare jar of cider. By evening, the friends had checked on one another, cleared doors, and built new paths through the meadow. Though tired, Tobias smiled as he lit his lamp. Even the fiercest storm, he thought, could not scatter their little circle of care. A week later, when the storm's drifts had settled into softer mounds, Tobias set out with Tilly to gather fallen branches for kindling. Along the brook's bend, they discovered an enormous heap of pine cones, piled as if someone had tipped over a whole tree's worth. Tilly clapped her paws. Treasure. They began hauling cones into baskets, only to discover Clover doing the same from the other side. Soon Bramble appeared too, dragging a sled. "If you lot leave me none," he grumbled, "I'll be cross." The pile seemed endless. No matter how many baskets they filled, more cones appeared, hidden under snow. Grady arrived last, munching on one as though it were food. "Tasty," he declared, though the others doubted him. They decided to make a game of it. Tobias measured the largest cone. Clover sorted the oddest shapes. Tilly built a tower taller than herself. Bramble tested how far he could roll one down the slope. Answer: not far. It buried itself in snow. By sunset, their sleds were loaded, their paws sticky with resin, and their laughter echoing through the cold air. When Tobias stacked a share by the hearth, he realized they had more pine cones than they could ever need. Perhaps, he mused aloud, the forest was being generous. The cones burned brightly that night, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. The warmth seemed doubly sweet, knowing it had been gathered together with friends. The cold deepened and nights stretched long. One evening, Tobias discovered his candle box nearly empty. He frowned, for without candles, his workshop would fall silent before dusk. He mentioned it to Clover, who confessed she had only 3 left herself. Bramble counted 2. Tilly had 1 stub. Grady, naturally, had none at all. He claimed candles smelled too waxy, though Tobias suspected he had simply forgotten to buy any in autumn. So they pooled what they had, bringing them to Tobias's workshop. "We'll use them sparingly," Clover suggested. And together, that night they lit just one. The little flame flickered in its saucer, casting golden shadows over the shelves and tools. They sat close, sipping warm broth, telling stories to pass the hours. Tilly's tale of a frog who knitted socks was so ridiculous that even Bramble chuckled. Grady contributed an exaggerated story of how he had once fought off a goose. Clover whispered to Tobias that the goose probably just honked at him. When the candle burned low, Tobias snuffed it carefully. "We'll save the rest for tomorrow." They left in good spirits, lanterns swinging, the cold night alive with stars. Tobias felt lighter than he had in days. Even in scarcity, there was abundance, so long as it was shared. The first sign wasn't dramatic, it was a drip. Tobias noticed it as he carried wood from his shed. A slow, steady drip, drip, drip from the eaves. When he looked up, he saw icicles darkening with water, as though the cold itself was growing tired. The next morning, patches of earth peeked through the snow near the hollow's edge. They were small, no larger than paw prints, but Clover gasped when she saw them. "Mud!" she cried, and laughed at how silly it sounded. The friends decided to take a short walk along the brook. The path was slippery, with half-melted snow crunching beneath their paws. But oh, how different the world felt. The brook, once silent under ice, gurgled faintly again. Moss glistened emerald against the thaw. Birds that had been quiet all winter trilled uncertain notes, as if warming up their voices for spring. Bramble grumbled about soggy fur, but walked along anyway. "It's the same every year," he muttered. "Everything floods, everything's wet." But Tobias noticed that even he stopped once or twice, staring at the sparkle of water sliding beneath the ice. At a bend in the brook, Tilly squealed with delight. Tiny shoots of green were pushing through the soil. "Look, look," she cried. Clover bent low, nearly nose to earth. "They'll be snowdrops. First flowers of the year." The group lingered longer than they intended, soaking in the feeling of change. When they finally turned back, the sun had dipped low, painting the thawing snow pink and gold. That evening, Tobias lit one of their remaining candles, set it on the windowsill, and wrote a note in his ledger. Today, the hollow took its first breath of spring. The thaw brought beauty, but also troubles. Tobias woke one night to the sound of dripping. At first he thought it was outside, but when he opened his eyes, he saw it, a fat, steady drip dripping onto his workbench. "Oh no," he groaned. His roof had sprung a leak. By morning, he had set a pan beneath the spot, but it was hardly a solution. "I'll need to patch it before the whole place turns into a pond," he muttered, tugging on his boots. He sought out Bramwell, who was already battling his own problem. His burrow door was stuck fast in mud. "I'll help with your roof, if you help me with this blasted door," Bramwell bargained. Tobias agreed. Together they pried the door free, Bramwell snorting and Tobias puffing until the mud gave a loud slurp, and flung them both backward. Clover, passing by, laughed so hard she nearly fell over. "You two look like you've been wrestling a swamp." Once Bramwell was free, the trio turned to Tobias's roof. Climbing carefully, they cleared snow and patched the gap with woven reeds, tar, and resin Clover had cleverly saved. Tilly arrived halfway through and insisted on helping, though her idea of helping was mostly handing up nails and singing a Johnny tune. By evening, the roof no longer dripped. Tobias lit his fire gratefully, listening to the storm outside without worry. He smiled at the thought, problems solve faster when paws work together. Bramwell, mud still caked on his fur, only muttered, "Humph. At least now you owe me a cup of cider." Tobias poured two. One afternoon, as Tobias sharpened his tools, he heard a sound he hadn't heard in months. A sharp whistle, cheerful and insistent. He looked up to see a glossy starling perched on his fence post, feathers shimmering green and purple in the weak sun. "Back already?" Tobias asked aloud, though of course the bird only whistled in reply. The news spread quickly. Clover saw a pair of finches darting over the meadow. Tilly spotted a lark tugging at twigs for its nest. Even Bramwell admitted he'd heard tapping woodpeckers in the pines. The return of the birds stirred something in everyone. Clover polished her garden tools, though the soil was still half frozen. Tilly began sketching ideas for a spring dance. She wanted to teach the sparrows, though whether sparrows could dance was questionable. Grady spent an entire afternoon humming loudly, claiming he was singing like the birds. That evening, the friends gathered outside for the first time in months. They sat on logs, their breath still clouding in the chill, and listened to the chorus building overhead. The air was sharp, the ground muddy, their paws damp, but their hearts lighter. As the sun set, the starling on Tobias's fence whistled one last tune before fluttering away. Tobias closed his eyes and thought, yes, spring is truly on its way. The end. Thank you for wandering through the woodland with us today. If you enjoyed your visit to Old Fernwood, don't forget to leave a like, share this tale with a friend, and subscribe for more cozy stories. Until next time, may your days be calm, your hearth warm, and your heart light.